Thank you so much. And good morning, everybody. Is the sound okay? Yes. Okay. So I'm so excited to be presenting this for you today for all sorts of reasons, but maybe the main one for me is that this is a really new piece of material. It's so new that I had to actually reread my paper last night to remember how to talk about it. So this is going to be, I think, the fourth presentation that I've given on this, and the paper is not published yet. It's coming out in the Journal for the International Society of System Sciences in a couple of weeks, so you should be able to have it. It's a big piece of work, and it's a piece of work that is, every once in a while I feed something to the Academy. But most of the time I live in the art world and in the film world and the visual world and the people world and the family therapy world and the work with kids world and the put your hands in the dirt world. And then there's these moments where I need to take what I've learned there and actually give it a name and give it up to the system to see if it can handle it. This is one of those pieces. So I'm so honored to be able to share this with you today. The other thing that I just kind of want to start by saying is that this presentation is going to be crunchy, crunchy on your brain, good morning, good morning. And then Ida's going to come after, and her work is, it's phenomenal the way that these pieces come together, which is, of course, kind of the whole metaphor, right? So it's not really about what's said here or about what's said through her work, but how the communication between forms in you. And that will be tomorrow what you'll remember. You probably won't have any of these stupid slides or quotes or crunchy bits of academia in your brain anymore, but you'll have a feeling, a sense. And that sense is something that grew between my voice, her voice, this room, each other, our breakfast. It's something that came between us and formed, so that you can't really point to it later and say what it was. But you have it. It's very real. It's just that you can't grab it. And in a sense, that is exactly what I'm here to talk about today. As you know, some of you have been in a couple of the other sessions I've been in, that one of the things that I'm working with, actually this is what I do with all my heart and soul and body, is I wander around wondering and working with notions of what is systems change. How do we think about what transformation is? What actually is this? And for me, that is a deep dive into something, it's pretty easy to talk about things being interconnected. Okay, they're interconnected. But what is actually happening in those interrelational processes? How do we go in deep into that study of the way that in an ecology, in a forest, in the ecology of a family, in an ecology of ideas, all those aspects are constantly responding and shifting to each other. What my child says, what we had for breakfast, what I learned from my parents, what's going on in the culture, what's on the internet, with all these things are merging and mixing and stewing. What's happening? And when we talk about change, where is the change? Where's the edge of me? Where's the edge of the family? Where's the edge of the forest? So ultimately, it's a question of evolution, isn't it? What is evolution? How does it happen? And before hitting into that zone, I think I need to ask, what's an ecology? So one of the ways that my father used to describe an ecology would be to describe the way that a male deer has antlers, right? And we can look at those antlers and we can say, those antlers are there so the deer can fight. There's a purpose. But those antlers are there to attract the female deer. Those antlers are there so that when the deer rubs up against particular bark, special insects have a possibility of life. When the antlers fall off, they provide the protein and the home for a whole lot of other organisms. Antlers in Chinese medicine, some antlers are ground to provide medicine for the heart, because when you see a deer, your heart goes, ah. I mean, maybe the most tragic use of antlers is to put them on the wall as a trophy. But still, we have to look at the multiple relational processes that in nature and ecology, there's never one purpose. There's never one particular interdependency. Interdependency is woven into multiple relationships, right? And those relationships provide life. That's how life is happening. Now, what's interesting about that is that they're all changing. That in order for evolution and life to continue, all those relationships have to keep changing. Simultaneously, I mean, doesn't that blow your mind? How do we even begin to think about that? How many relationships are shifting? And in relationship to each other, it's like an exponential. It's fantastic. So, in this moment that we are living in, there's a really urgent call for change. And I am interested in where that change lies. One of the things that has become very obvious to me is that you can't tell people to behave better. You can't tell someone to love you. You can't tell people to respect each other. You can't tell them not to be racist. You can't tell them not to be corrupt. There is a realm in which these processes and these premises are lurking that is below or above or to the side or somewhere outside of our explicit, familiar zone. Now, seemingly, this is one of the places where there's the most amount of work to do. But the itch and the urgency to do it keeps pushing us into the explicit response system. We have to make policy. We have to make rules. We have to fix this in an explicit way. But these issues are not there. They're like shadows there. You can grab at them, you can try and make policies, but they keep bubbling up. They're down somewhere else. I keep saying they're down, but I don't know. I mean, it really could be up to the side. I was sort of triggered by a comment my daughter made when we were having a conversation. And she said, yeah, you know, it's like everything we really need to deal with is so insidious, it can't be dealt with. Insidious, in a word, in English, is an interesting word. I don't really know what the Swedish translation is. But the idea with insidious is that it's something that is produced gradually over time in unseen ways, and it becomes dangerous. Things combining in unseen ways over time that produce danger or harm. Can you read that? And those things that I mentioned, racism is insidious, right? You might think I'm not racist, and you might really not be racist except for the way that the bus driver looked at you, or the way the teacher talked to you, or the way that you were read stories to as a child, or the way that people interact with you, or just the possibility of using someone else's telephone, or, there's so many things that are actually in the unseen that reaffirm each other, that combine together to form these premises that you may not even know are there. So, and the same thing can be true for all sorts of other insidious situations. Materialism, capitalism, corruption, all of these things are produced. They have very explicit consequences. But if you just respond to the consequences, you miss the premises, right? It's easy enough to say, well, if we have racism, we have to make non-racism to destroy it. But that doesn't undo those deeper levels of coalescence. So what I started to wonder when my daughter said this is, because you can see how it ties into ecology, right? Well, obviously there must be an opposite. What would the opposite of insidious be, such that you would be looking at something that would be a gradual coalescing of multiple experiences toward vitality? What would that be? What would that word be? Surely we need that word. What is that gradual coalescing that we don't see? Not because it's hidden. It's not hidden. It's not invisible. It's just not seen. What would that word be? And so I made a word. I went looking for a word, high and low and up and down, and I couldn't find such a word. So I made a word, which is a fun thing to do. And I took the Greek preface, aphani, which means unseen. But it means unseen in kind of an interesting way. It's not just, like I said, it's not just hidden or invisible. It's unseen in that it's holding back. It's kind of waiting in the shadows. There's a humility there. It's not hiding. It's waiting. It's watching. And so we see that root, aphani, we see it in words like phenomenon, fantasy. There's a beautiful word in English, diaphanous. How to describe diaphanous? Any Swedish translation of diaphanous? No. It's like that gauzy, silky, not opaque, but not transparent. Ghosts are diaphanous. Lace is diaphanous. So it's unseen in a blurry sort of humble way. And then poesis, which you might recognize from Maturana's work on autopoiesis. And poesis, besides beautifully being connected to poetry, also is the word for becoming. So the word that I am here to give you today is this beautiful new word, aphanipoesis. And the idea with aphanipoesis is that it's an unseen coalescing toward vitality. Aphanipoesis. I want to go back to evolution for a second. So, there's a quote here from my father, and I started to work with this, obviously I've been working with this for a long time, and this is kind of the culmination into a particular theory. And what I keep finding is that there is a need, there is something necessary about this unseen world. I'm just going to read you this quote, and of course, so much of my work is coming from my dad's work. And I have often felt that there was something in his work around systems that was different, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And it makes it very difficult to read, but at the same time, if you look at the words that he's written, the sentences, the paragraphs, he never, ever, ever crosses into the kind of descriptions that flatten life. There is always the possibility for these very deeply entwined multiple realms of communication to be producing life, to be lifing. And very often when people are describing living systems, they get so kind of anxious to describe the living system that the description itself kills it. So this process of description that he works with and the way that he's holding very rigorous ideas also keeps things alive, which makes it very difficult to read, but worth it. So I'll read you this quote. He says, I was laying down very elementary ideas about epistemology. That's the way you know what you know. That is, about how we can know anything. In the pronoun we, I of course included the starfish and the redwood forest, the segmenting egg in the Senate of the United States. And in the anything, which these creatures variously know, I included how to grow a five-way symmetry, how to survive a forest fire, how to grow and still stay the same shape, how to learn, how to write a constitution, how to invent and drive a car, how to count to 7, and so on. Marvelous creatures with almost miraculous knowledge and skills. Above all, I included how to evolve, because it seemed to me that both the evolution and learning must fit the same formal regularities, or so-called laws. How does an organism know how to evolve? This is a question. How does an organism know how to evolve? If the organism continues in its habituated, familiar form and behaviors, communications, there's not change, is there? So somehow there must be a realm in which there is something unfamiliar, something unseen, something unused, something unhabituated, stored, waiting, so that in those moments when there must be change, it's possible to change. The possibility of change is living outside those habituated behaviors, communications, relationships, patterns, rhythms. That's fascinating. So, what might it look like to explore that unseen realm in which things are coalescing toward vitality? Right? There's only the possibility for vitality if the organisms in relationship can both change and somehow stay the same. Evolution requires continuance, right? If you're not continuing to be, you're obsolete. If there's too much change, you can't continue. But if there's not change, if there's not discontinuance, there can be no continuance. These things have to happen together. So what's continuing and what's not continuing? And where is the new information? Where's the new possibility? Where is that living? My feeling is that it's living in this Athani poetic realm, that there's something, there's the way in which impressions and experiences and things have come together in ways that are unseen, that are just waiting to be accessed. Right? Now, the dark side of that is this insidious concept. In the same way, you have experiences and impressions that you're not aware of that are just waiting to be activated, and the advertising world knows a great deal about how to activate those. It slips in. And when you try to grab it and fix it and solve it and change it, you can't quite get to it. So where's the change? I have been working with this transcontextual idea in the warm data world, and I think some of you have heard me talk about it before, but it's so useful because it gets you out of the flatness. So this is a word that was coined by my dad, and he says, in this piece, he's actually talking about double binds, but he says, let me coin the word transcontextual as a general term for this genus of syndromes. It seems that both those whose life is enriched by transcontextual gifts and those who are impoverished by transcontextual confusions are alike in one respect. For them, there's always or often a double take. A falling leaf, the greeting of a friend, oops, okay, or a primrose by the river's brim is not just that and nothing more. Exogenous experiences can be framed in the context of dream, and internal thought may be projected into the context of the external world, and so on. For all this, we seek a partial explanation in learning and experience. When you see a friend across the street and they wave to you, there's all sorts of things that could be there. It could just be a simple hello that you do every day. It could be that that person hasn't waved to you in 3 years. It could be that you haven't waved to them in 3 years. It could be that you're walking with someone that you know they don't want to wave to. It could be that you've been away for a long time. It could be that usually they walk across the street and wrap their arms around you, but there's a pandemic, and so they can't, so they wave from across the street. You see, the possibilities and the layers of communication run so deep, and there's so much there, right? The falling of a leaf, it could mean it's autumn. It could be some sort of poetic metaphor of melancholy, of change. It could be that there's a bird in the tree that's knocking things down. It could be that there's a wind coming. So in every moment of our lives, we are actually perceiving, holding, storing, moving through vast possibilities. What we log on to, what we grab hold of, what we define and make real, so to speak, is just one teeny tiny little portion of what's there, one teeny tiny. So what I find really exciting about this is that what we're talking about is that the possibility of flexibility, right, is sitting there in this unseen, weird combining of impressions and experiences that we can't point to, we can't find it, we can't manipulate it, you can't tell it what to do. It just waits. But surely, flexibility is probably the most vital, if you want to call it a resource. I think that's kind of a vulgarity, but especially as we're looking at our world in this moment, where so many of our habituated processes are seemingly unchangeable, even though we know we must change them. So somehow, this double bind, okay? A double bind is when you get caught in one circumstance, one context, and you can't do anything right, and you get caught in another, and you can't do anything right. Right? The famous description is that you have this partner who says, "You never tell me you love me." And then if you tell them that you love them, well, you didn't really mean it, did you? Because you only told them because you had to. And if you don't tell them that you love them, well, then they were right. Right? And so we've probably all been on both sides of that unfortunate circumstance. And also in that moment, you can't say, "Hey, this is actually a trick question," because then you're being entirely insensitive. So you're in a double bind, all right? But the double bind is a push to another order of learning and possible ways of living. And it's used in psychotherapy quite a bit, but actually, for the psychotherapists in the room, this theory was always meant to be an evolutionary theory. Because this is what happened. At some point, all organisms reach that moment when the way they used to survive is no longer viable. The relationships that they have been in are all changing, right? The context is changing, and if you don't change, you can't live. So you have to change. Everything you know about how to live will kill you. So you have to shift. And this is apparently where we are at a societal, socioeconomic, cultural double bind now. So flexibility in that moment is critical. How do we access that pool of possibility that is not seeable from the existing system, from the existing habituated processes of logic and communication? There is another, thank goodness, there's another realm. Because if we keep sourcing from the habituated logic, we keep perpetuating the problems, or the behaviors. Because we know them as life. They are known. So this flexibility is sitting beneath the surface, again with my down thing, could be above, could be to the side. Greger says, social flexibility is a resource as precious as oil or titanium and must be budgeted in appropriates, to be spent like fat upon needed change. Broadly, since the eating up of flexibility is due to regenerative, i.e. escalating subsystems within the civilization, flexibility is to specialization as entropy is to negentropy. Flexibility is defined as uncommitted potentiality for change. Where is the uncommitted potentiality for change? And how might groups like this begin to work with that? Uncommitted potentiality for change. There's a good deal of attention in the last years on emergence and what's emerging. And in the aphanipoiesis theory, what I'm actually suggesting is that we look at what's upstream, what comes before emergence. Before there is the emergence of a situation, there has been a long cooking of stories and impressions, a long coalescing of things that have come together in this aphanipoetic realm that then become emergence. Now, some emergence is lovely, and some emergence is emergency. Saying what's right and wrong or good and bad there is kind of beyond where we have time to go today. But again, to recognize that what we're talking about here with the aphanipoiesis is how this underworld, this unseen realm, this holding those things that will become. Afani poiesis, what's becoming in the unseen realm. Let's see. I'm going to skip that one. What's our time?
So we were 5 minutes delayed, so we'll have past the
Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to, well, there's one thing in this quote that's really interesting. Ideas in a civilization are, like all other variables, interlinked, partly by some sort of psychologic and partly by consensus about the quasi-concrete effects of action. Okay, did you hear what he just said? The quasi-concrete effects of action. Just saying. It's characteristic of this complex network of determination of ideas and actions that particular links in the net are often weak, but that at any given idea or action is subject to multiple determination by interwoven strands. Okay, this is just like the antlers. All right, ideas are in an ecology, and they are moving in multiple contextual processes. When we turn off the light when we go to bed, influenced partly by the economics of scarcity, partly by the premises of transference, partly by ideas of privacy, partly to reduce sensory input, etc. The multiple determination is characteristic of all biological fields. Characteristically, every feature of the anatomy of an animal or plant and every detail of behavior is determined by a multitude of interacting factors at both the genetic and physiological levels, and correspondingly the process, any ongoing ecosystem are the outcome of multiple determination. I want to recall for a moment how radical that is. Because when we look at the way in which we would identify a problem, define it, go deep down on it, identify its opposite, i.e. its response, what's the goal to solve the problem, the solution, and strategically create a way to get to that solution from the identified problem. And how wildly out of sync that is with how ecological process takes place. That's a difficult piece, isn't it? I mean, it would seem that we could know, right? We have particulate in the atmosphere. We've got to get the particulate in the atmosphere out of the atmosphere. That's the problem. That's the solution. We have particulate in the atmosphere. Now, what are the transcontextual processes in which the submergence in the aphanipoetic realm, and what's been happening, into which that emerged? What are the ways in which our parents projected on us ideas of success or viability, credibility in the world that we're becoming, and how you went to school, how you live your life, how you buy your clothes, how you eat your breakfast, how you make love, how you take part in life? What are all of those processes? How are they coalescing in ways that form particulate in the sky? So that what we're looking at is a way of addressing this coalescence. How do you do that? Well, the beautiful thing is that there are these gaps. Life is full of holes. It's full of holes. I say something, but what you understand or what you take from what I say is only what you were able to receive. right? The experiences that came before this morning make a particular teapot of possible understandings of what it is that I'm saying. I mean, what I think I mean and what you think I mean, there's a gap. This gap is fantastic. It's the hope of the future. Because it's the place where there is confusion, where there's looseness, where the tightness of structured, habituated behaviors, familiar, ongoing continuance is disrupted in those gaps. There's a disruption there. And thank goodness for that. Because what it does is it makes you come forward to me, and it makes me come toward you. I leave my familiar a little bit, and you leave your familiar a little bit, and we learn something in that gap. All right, now the same thing is happening in the meta. All the organisms are in relation, life is happening, there's things that take place, and the organisms respond, but they respond with gaps. And what is in the communication, what's in the semiotics of that, is this incredible flexibility that we call evolution. The possibility for evolution. How do we retissue the gaps? In sum, all descriptions, all information is, as such, to touch upon only a few points of the matter to be described. The rest is left uncovered, hinted at, perhaps by extrapolation from what's actually communicated, but in principle undermined and uncontrolled by the message system. The US Constitution, for instance, leaves almost everything unsaid. What lawyers have spun out in addition still defines only a few details and here and there a basic principle of human interaction. Most is left undefined and is left to be worked out after the first formative hint is given. When I hear a piece of music, let's say a piece of flamenco music, okay, something that's a little bit outside my cultural realm, what do I hear? Right, when I'm talking about the unseen, I'm actually talking about the unheard, unfelt, untasted, what do I hear? Well, I hear what I'm capable of hearing. There's a good deal in those note combinings, chord changes, rhythms, the lyrics in the song that I cannot take in. They are not hidden. It's just that for me, they're unseen. So what do I do? I hear what I hear and I start to fill the gaps. I take my phonic poetic world and I begin to fill the gaps. Oh, this is that. Oh, this is that. Oh, this is that. And as I do that, I'm moving into making something new. There's something new emerging. There's a new, when I taste something, the first thing I'm going to say is, this reminds me of, I've never tasted this before, but it's kind of like, right? You may be thinking, this is funny poesis idea. This reminds me of, right? So what is the implication of this? What do we do with this? And I have 3 minutes to mention this. So what I have been really interested in with this is how to make space for a kind of rewilding of this interior world. Of the interior world in which the premises from which we respond to life are built. Rewilding that interior aphonic-poetic space. To do that, one of the things that I am working with is how to create circumstances that provide gapping, that can be retissued with your stories, your experiences, your particular aphonic-poetic world, is given new ways of organizing itself, new stuff to play with. So that if I put this idea here, and this there, and this there, and this there, you will begin to reconnect them, because that's what we do. Living things make relational connections. It's just what we do. We just can't help that. So I call this side-by-siding. It's what the warm data labs are based on. And what happens in the warm data lab, some of you were in one yesterday, it's really hard to see. What happened? Where did it go? What happened? Did we do something? Did we discover something? Did we take something out of there? Probably not. But somewhere there are some premises that have shifted. So that when someone says something next time about something, you're going to immediately think, oh, well, what about these other contexts? Ask another question. Come into the relationship with another tone. So this, for me, is a really exciting world of possible response to where we are right now that gets at some of the most insidious issues. Because I don't actually know how we're going to do what needs to get done without dealing with the premises, without dealing with those inner worlds. And just like we have a kind of monocropping in the agriculture world, we've had a monocropping of ideas and possible things that we could make connections between. So increasing what can be side-by-sided increases the number of possibilities and connections that can be made. It's just like rewilding the field. Rewilding that interior, unseen realm so that it might hold more complexity, more possibility to draw from. And I refer to that as the funny